The hotel room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I sat at the desk, laptop open, finalizing slides for an upcoming presentation. Work trips were never glamorous, but they gave me a break from the tension at home. My phone buzzed on the desk. Seeing my mother's name on the screen, I hesitated. Calls from her were rare, and when they came, they usually weren't pleasant. But something about this felt different. "Hi, Mom," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Rachel," she said in that clipped tone she always used when she thought she was delivering wisdom. "I wanted to let you know we made a decision about your trust fund." My heart skipped a beat. "What decision?" "Well," she began, as if this was the most normal conversation in the world. "Your father and I decided to transfer it to Hannah. She's better at handling money, and frankly, she deserves it more than you do." The words hit like a punch to the gut. My trust fund wasn't just money. It was the one thing my father had left me when he passed, something he'd set aside specifically for me. "And when were you planning to tell me this?" I asked, my voice unnervingly calm. "Well, I'm telling you now," she said, her tone defensive. "It's not like you were doing anything with it. Hannah needs it for her business, and you've always had other opportunities." By other opportunities, she meant that I had built my career without their help. Unlike Hannah, I hadn't relied on constant handouts. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, my voice icy. There was a pause. I could tell she was waiting for me to explode, to beg for an explanation or argue with her reasoning. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. "Well," she said awkwardly, "I'm glad you understand." "Oh, I understand," I replied, my voice steady. "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up and set the phone down carefully, though my hands were trembling. My trust fund, my father's legacy, gone just like that. Hannah was her golden child, the one who could do no wrong. It didn't matter that she was reckless and entitled, that her so-called business was a vanity project doomed to fail. To my mother, Hannah was better. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring as the anger began to settle into something colder, sharper. That night, I canceled my dinner plans and ordered room service instead. As I ate, I replayed the conversation in my head. My mother's casual betrayal, the way she dismissed something so important to me like it was nothing. But instead of wallowing, I started planning. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. The next morning, I woke early, my mind buzzing with clarity. My laptop was still open from the night before, the presentation half finished. I stared at the screen for a moment before shutting it down. My work could wait. This was bigger. I emailed my assistant, canceling the rest of my meetings for the week. "Family emergency," I wrote, keeping the explanation vague. Then, I booked a flight home. On the plane, I pulled out my journal and started jotting down notes. Secure personal accounts. Confirm trust fund details with the bank. Research Hannah's business. Gather evidence. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this go. When I landed, I went straight to the bank. I didn't even stop by my apartment to drop off my bags. The banker, a kind-looking man in his 50s, greeted me with a polite smile. "How can I help you today, Ms. Mitchell?" "I need to check the status of my trust fund," I said, handing over my ID. His expression shifted as he typed on his computer. "It looks like the account has been closed." My chest tightened. "Closed?" "Yes," he said, turning the monitor slightly toward me. "The transfer was authorized by your mother and stepsister, with signatures on file." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. The betrayal was worse than I'd thought. "Can I get a copy of those documents?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Of course," he said. As I walked out of the bank, copies of the signatures in my hand, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming what was mine. My mother and Hannah thought they could take everything and get away with it. They thought I'd roll over, that I'd be too timid to fight back. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As I drove home, a plan began to form in my mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The drive home was quiet. The hum of the car engine the only sound as my mind churned through memories I'd long tried to bury. My mother's betrayal felt sudden, but the truth was, this wasn't new. This was just the latest chapter in a long story of favoritism and rejection. When my father was alive, things had been different. He was my rock, steady, kind, and always fair. Even when Hannah entered the picture after my mother's remarriage, he made sure I felt secure. But when he passed, everything changed. My mother had always been critical, but after Dad was gone, her words cut sharper. My accomplishments were fine, but Hannah's were incredible. If I landed a promotion, it was met with a lukewarm smile. If Hannah so much as mentioned a new project, My mother would gush as though she'd just cured cancer. I remembered one Thanksgiving vividly. I had just bought my first apartment, a small but charming one-bedroom in the city. I was so proud, excited to share the news with my family. During dinner, I mentioned it, expecting at least a polite congratulations. Instead, my mother waved it off. "That's nice, Rachel," she said, barely looking up from her plate. Then she turned to Hannah. "Sweetheart, didn't you say you were thinking about buying a second home? Tell us about that." I sat there, stunned, as Hannah launched into a monologue about a beach house she hadn't even put an offer on. No one acknowledged what I'd said. That memory, like so many others, played on repeat in my head as I parked outside my apartment. The favoritism had always been there, like a quiet drumbeat in the background of my life. But this trust fund betrayal? This was a crescendo. I set my bag down and booted up my laptop. If my mother and Hannah thought I was just going to accept their decision, they were in for a surprise. First, I started combing through public records. Hannah's business had always been a sore spot for me, not because I envied her, but because I knew it was a facade. She called herself an entrepreneur, but as far as I could tell, all she did was throw extravagant parties and take Instagram photos. Within an hour, I found what I was looking for, a recently registered LLC under Hannah's name. The business description was vague, and the address was a luxury office space downtown. How does she afford that? I muttered to myself, scrolling through property records. Have you ever felt like your family treated you unfairly? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. The trust fund money wasn't just sitting in an account for future investments. It was being spent, lavishly. There were invoices for high-end furniture, catering services, and even a branding consultant. Hannah wasn't building a business. She was funding a lifestyle. I found photos on social media that made my blood boil. Hannah in a designer dress, sipping champagne at what looked like a product launch. My mother beaming beside her, holding a glass of wine. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings with family." Couldn't have done it without Mom's support. My stomach churned. Not only had they stolen from me, but they were flaunting it. I needed more evidence. The next morning, I drove to the office building listed as Hannah's business address. The lobby was sleek and modern, the kind of place that screamed money. "Hi," I said to the receptionist, keeping my voice cheerful. "I'm looking for Hannah Mitchell's office. I'm a friend of the family." The receptionist smiled politely. "Oh, Hannah? She's here a lot for events, but she doesn't actually have a permanent office. She rents the space for meetings." I thanked her and left, my suspicions confirmed. Hannah wasn't running a business. She was playing dress up. Back at home, I organized everything I'd found. Screenshots of social media posts, financial records I'd requested from the bank, and notes from my visit to her office. The more I pieced together, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about the trust fund. It was about years of being dismissed, undervalued, and overshadowed by a stepsister who couldn't care less about anyone but herself. That evening, as I reviewed my files, I noticed something odd, a large withdrawal from the trust fund account labeled legal retainer. "What are you up to, Hannah?" I murmured, making a note to investigate further. My mother and Hannah had always underestimated me. They thought I wouldn't fight back. But as I stared at the evidence in front of me, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. The morning sun streamed through the blinds as I sat at my kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The night before had been a blur of late-night research and meticulous note-taking. My laptop screen displayed an open spreadsheet, columns labeled with details of transactions, dates, and suspicious expenses tied to my trust fund. To my family, I was probably still the quiet, unassuming Rachel, the one who rarely spoke up, who played the peacemaker, who swallowed every slight and insult with a polite smile. But they had no idea how much I'd learned from years of biting my tongue and watching. This time, I wouldn't stay quiet. The first step in my plan was securing my own assets. I logged into my personal bank accounts, combing through them line by line. The trust fund might have been a significant part of my financial future, but it wasn't the only thing I had. Over the years, I'd saved diligently, putting away bonuses and freelance income into a separate account that no one else knew about. Not even my mother. Still, I wasn't taking any chances. I set up a meeting with my bank's fraud department, ensuring my accounts were secure and adding additional layers of protection. Any suspicious activity, no matter how small, and I want an immediate alert, I told the representative. "Understood, Ms. Mitchell," he replied. It was a small step, but it gave me peace of mind. Next, I began organizing the evidence I'd gathered about the trust fund. The screenshots of Hannah's Instagram posts, the financial records from the bank, and the details of her so-called business expenses. It all painted a clear picture of how my money had been misused. But I needed more. I called Rebecca, a lawyer I'd worked with on a previous project. "Rebecca, I need your help," I said after explaining the situation. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. "They drained your trust fund and didn't think you'd notice?" "Pretty much," I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Send me everything you have," she said. "We'll start building a case." While Rebecca dove into the legal side, I worked on another angle, keeping my family in the dark. The last thing I needed was for my mother or Hannah to suspect I was planning anything. If they caught wind of my actions, they might try to cover their tracks, or worse, spin the narrative against me. So I played along. When my mother called to check in, her voice laced with faux concern, I kept my responses light and vague. "How's work, Rachel?" she asked. "You've been so busy lately." "Just the usual," I said. "Lots of projects keeping me on my toes." "Good, good," she replied. "You know, Hannah's been working so hard on her business. She's really doing something special." I bit my tongue to keep from snapping back. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "That's great to hear." If my calm demeanor threw her off, she didn't show it. Hannah, on the other hand, was blissfully unaware of anything outside her own bubble. She continued to post photos of extravagant dinners, designer shopping sprees, and business meetings at luxury resorts. The audacity would have been laughable if it weren't infuriating. To her, I was probably just an afterthought. Have you ever had to stay quiet, even when you knew someone was taking advantage of you? How did you keep your composure? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. The turning point came 2 weeks later, when I received an email from an unexpected source. The subject line read, "Something you should know." At first, I thought it was spam, but when I opened it, my breath caught. The email was from a former employee of my father's estate management team. "Hi, Rachel. I'm reaching out because I recently learned about the situation with your trust fund. I don't know if you're aware, but your mother made several changes to the estate arrangements after your father passed. You might want to look into it. Best, Karen." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. "What changes?" I immediately replied, thanking Karen and asking for more details. Within minutes, she sent a follow-up email with an attachment, a scanned copy of an amendment to my father's will. The document was signed by my mother and dated just a few months after my father's death. It granted her full control over not only my trust fund, but several other financial assets that had originally been designated for me. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. My mother hadn't just drained my trust fund, she'd rewritten my father's wishes entirely. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate. As I stared at the document, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about exposing the truth. And I wasn't going to stop until I did. The air was thick with tension as I pulled into my mother's driveway. Her sprawling suburban home, with its perfectly manicured lawn and pristine flower beds, stood as a monument to her obsession with appearances. Today, though, I wasn't here to admire the landscaping. The evidence sat in a folder on the passenger seat. Financial statements, screenshots, and most damning of all, the altered will. I'd rehearsed this confrontation in my head 100 times, but the reality of it still sent a ripple of anxiety through me. I took a deep breath, grabbed the folder, and stepped out of the car. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and expensive candles. My mother was in the living room, sipping tea and scrolling through her phone. She glanced up as I walked in, her expression briefly flickering with surprise before settling into her usual look of mild disapproval. "Rachel," she said, setting her cup down. "This is unexpected. Everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I dropped the folder onto the coffee table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, frowning as she reached for it. "Proof," I said simply, "of what you and Hannah did to my trust fund and to Dad's estate." Her hand froze mid-reach, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, maybe? Panic? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a steely glare. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her tone clipped. "Don't lie to me, Mom," I said, my voice firm. "I've got bank records, transaction histories, and the amended will you signed after Dad died. You gave Hannah everything, and you thought I'd never find out." She opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. The color drained from her face as she skimmed the documents, but she quickly composed herself. "This is ridiculous," she said, snapping the folder shut. "You're overreacting, Rachel. Everything we did was for the good of the family." "For the good of the family?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You drained my trust fund to fund Hannah's vanity projects, and you tampered with Dad's estate. How is that for the good of the family?" At that moment, the front door opened, and Hannah walked in, carrying an armful of shopping bags. "Oh, hey, Rachel," she said breezily, not noticing the tension in the room. "What's up?" I turned to face her, my anger boiling over. "What's up?" I said, my voice icy. "What's up is that I know you've been spending my trust fund on all this." I gestured to the bag she was holding. "And I know Mom helped you do it." Hannah blinked, her smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the bank records," I said, stepping closer to her. "The ones that show you've been using my money to play entrepreneur. And the amended will that gave Mom control of everything Dad left me." For a moment, Hannah looked genuinely stunned. Then she recovered, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on, Rachel," she said, dropping the bags onto the floor. "It's not like you were doing anything with that money. I needed it to get my business off the ground. And let's be real. You've always been fine on your own." Her casual dismissal hit me like a slap. "This isn't about whether I'm fine," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "It's about the fact that you stole from me. Both of you." My mother stood, her face a mask of indignation. "We didn't steal anything," she said. "We made decisions that we felt were best for everyone. Everyone except me," I shot back. "But don't worry. I've already started legal proceedings to fix that." My mother's eyes widened. "Legal proceedings?" "That's right," I said. "I've frozen the accounts tied to the trust fund, and Rebecca, my lawyer, is preparing a case against both of you for fraud and financial misconduct." Hannah let out a nervous laugh. "You're kidding, right? You wouldn't actually take this to court?" "Watch me," I said, locking eyes with her. The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling over us. My mother, always quick to regain the upper hand, crossed her arms and glared at me. "You're being ungrateful," she said. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By dragging your family through the mud." I let out a bitter laugh. "Ungrateful? Mom, you stole my future and handed it to Hannah like it was nothing. You don't get to play the victim here." I gathered the folder and turned to leave, but not before delivering one final message. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice cold. "You haven't seen anything yet." As I walked out of the house, my phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "We've uncovered something else. Call me ASP." The battle wasn't over. It was just getting started. The morning after I left my mother's house, I sat in Rebecca's office, a stack of documents spread across the polished oak desk between us. Rebecca, always calm and composed, pushed her glasses up her nose as she reviewed the latest findings from her investigative team. "Rachel," she said, flipping through the papers, "we've uncovered something that changes everything." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What is it?" Rebecca slid a file toward me. "It looks like your mother and Hannah didn't just drain the trust fund. There are additional accounts tied to the estate that were accessed without authorization." And she paused, her expression darkening. "We found a signature on one of the transfer documents. It's supposed to be yours, but it's clearly forged." My stomach churned as I scanned the document. The signature was a clumsy imitation of mine, close enough to fool a casual observer, but obvious to anyone familiar with my handwriting. "They forged my signature?" I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "It appears so," Rebecca replied. "This opens the door for criminal charges. Forgery and fraud are serious offenses." The revelation hit me hard. As much as I wanted justice, the thought of taking this to the next level filled me with a sick sense of dread. No matter how much they'd hurt me, these were still the people I'd called family. But this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated, deliberate crime. "Are you ready to proceed?" Rebecca asked gently. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes, let's move forward." The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, document reviews, and mounting evidence. Rebecca's team worked tirelessly, uncovering a web of financial mismanagement that went back years. My mother had used estate funds to pay for Hannah's lavish lifestyle, designer clothes, expensive vacations, and even the lease on her luxury car. Meanwhile, Hannah had taken out a series of loans in my name, using the trust fund as collateral. I stayed quiet as the case built momentum. My mother and Hannah still didn't realize the storm that was about to hit them. Instead, they carried on as though nothing was wrong. Hannah continued posting her carefully curated Instagram life, complete with photos of overpriced brunches and designer shopping sprees. My mother attended charity galas, smiling for the cameras and pretending to be the perfect matriarch. It was infuriating and strangely motivating. Finally, the day came when Rebecca filed the lawsuit. The legal complaint detailed every fraudulent action, from the forged signature to the misuse of estate funds. Rebecca also filed for an injunction to freeze all accounts tied to my mother and Hannah, ensuring they couldn't move or hide any remaining assets. News of the lawsuit spread quickly, thanks to a well-timed press release. Within hours, my phone started buzzing with messages from family, friends, and acquaintances. "Rachel, is it true? I can't believe your own family would do this to you. Good for you, standing up for yourself. Let me know if you need anything." Even Lisa, my mother's longtime friend and staunch defender, sent a message. "Rachel, I had no idea this was happening. I'm so sorry. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." The fallout hit my mother and Hannah like a tidal wave. Hannah's Instagram went silent, the polished facade of her life cracking under the weight of public scrutiny. My mother canceled her social appearances, retreating behind closed doors as the truth of their actions came to light. But their silence didn't bring me any satisfaction. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I stared at the growing pile of evidence on my coffee table. My victory felt hollow, weighed down by the emotional toll of what I'd lost. My relationship with my mother was beyond repair, and Hannah? She wasn't just my stepsister anymore. She was the person who had tried to steal my future. I thought about the holidays we'd spent together, the moments when I convinced myself we were a real family. It all felt like a lie now, tainted by greed and betrayal. Was it worth it? I wasn't sure anymore. Then Rebecca called with another update. "Rachel," she said, her tone serious. "We just found something new. It looks like Hannah tried to take out another loan recently, using your name again." The loan officer flagged the application because the signature didn't match. My breath caught. "She still tried to use my name?" "It seems that way," Rebecca said. "This might strengthen our case, but it also shows just how far she's willing to go." I ended the call and sat in stunned silence. The audacity was staggering. Even after everything, Hannah was still trying to manipulate the system. This wasn't over. Not yet. I knew what I had to do. This time, I wasn't just going to stop Hannah. I was going to make sure she could never pull something like this again. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension as we waited for the judge to enter. My mother and Hannah sat at their table, their faces tight with thinly veiled frustration. Across the aisle, Rebecca organized our files with calm precision, her confidence steadying me even as my nerves simmered beneath the surface. This was it, the moment everything would come to light. The hearing began with Rebecca presenting our case. She spoke with unwavering clarity, laying out the timeline of events, the unauthorized withdrawals, the forged signature, and the misuse of funds from my father's estate. "This is not simply a case of poor financial management," Rebecca said, addressing the judge. "This is a deliberate, calculated act of fraud perpetrated against my client, Rachel Mitchell, by her own family." She handed a folder to the court clerk, who delivered it to the judge. Included in this file are documents proving the forgery, as well as testimony from a handwriting expert confirming that the signature on the transfer authorization does not belong to Ms. Mitchell. I glanced at my mother, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Hannah's face was pale, her usual air of entitlement replaced by something resembling fear. When it was their turn to respond, their lawyer tried to downplay the accusations, framing the situation as a misunderstanding. Mrs. Mitchell and her daughter, Hannah, believed they were acting within their rights as trustees of the estate, he argued. Any errors in documentation were unintentional. Unintentional. The word hung in the air, hollow and unconvincing. Rebecca didn't miss a beat. "If these actions were unintentional," she said, rising from her seat, "why was the trust fund drained to zero without my client's knowledge? Why were additional loans taken out in her name? And why did the signatures on these documents not match her own?" She paused, letting the questions sink in. "Your Honor, this isn't negligence. It's theft." The judge called for a short recess to review the evidence. As we waited, I couldn't help but notice the way my mother avoided looking at me. She stared straight ahead, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Hannah, on the other hand, sat with her arms crossed, her defiance thinly masking her unease. "Are you okay?" Rebecca asked quietly, leaning toward me. "I will be," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. When the judge returned, the room fell silent. After reviewing the evidence presented, she began, "It is clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Mitchell and Ms. Hannah Mitchell were not only unauthorized but also fraudulent." She turned to my mother and Hannah. "The forgery of documents and misuse of estate funds are serious offenses. This court orders the immediate freezing of all accounts tied to the estate. Furthermore, Restitution must be made to Ms. Rachel Mitchell in the full amount of the trust fund. A wave of relief washed over me, though it was tempered by the realization of what this victory had cost. My mother let out a sharp breath, her composure cracking for the first time. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "I've done everything for this family, and this is the thanks I get." Rebecca stood, her expression cold. "With all due respect, Mrs. Mitchell, this isn't about gratitude. It's about accountability." The judge banged her gavel, silencing the room. "Mrs. Mitchell, I suggest you save your comments for another time. This hearing is adjourned." After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. The trust fund was back under my control, and the financial damage my mother and Hannah had caused was beginning to be repaired. But the weight of what I'd lost, my family, my trust, still lingered. That evening, as I sifted through some old files in my apartment, I came across a box labeled Dad's Things. Inside, I found photographs, letters, and other mementos from my father's life. Among them was a sealed envelope with my name written in his familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a handwritten letter. "Dear Rachel, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. I want you to know how proud I am of you and the person you've become. The trust fund I set up for you isn't just about money. It's about ensuring you have the freedom to pursue your dreams, no matter what. You have a strength in you that I've always admired. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Love, Dad." Tears blurred my vision as I read his words. He'd known how important that trust fund was, not for the money itself, but for what it represented. Sitting there, holding the letter, I realized something. This fight wasn't just about reclaiming my inheritance. It was about honoring my father's belief in me and proving, to myself and the world, that I was stronger than they'd ever given me credit for. As I placed the letter back in the box, my phone buzzed with a notification. An email from Rebecca. New developments regarding the loans Hannah tried to take out. "Call me ASAP." The fight wasn't over yet. The sunlight streaming through my studio windows felt warmer that morning, like a quiet acknowledgement from the universe that I had turned a corner. The legal battle had ended, but the process of rebuilding my life was just beginning. My father's letter sat on my desk, a constant reminder of his belief in me. He had set up the trust fund to give me freedom, and now that it was back in my hands, I finally understood what he meant. This wasn't just money. It was a chance to create something meaningful, something he would have been proud of. I poured myself into building a nonprofit organization, a dream I carried in the back of my mind for years, but had never pursued. Inspired by my father's love for the outdoors and his dedication to education, I decided to create an initiative focused on providing underprivileged kids with access to outdoor learning experiences. I called it Roots and Wings. Rebecca helped me establish the legal structure, ensuring the reclaimed trust fund would serve as the organization's foundation. From there, I reached out to old colleagues, friends, and even a few family acquaintances who had expressed their support during the lawsuit. The response was overwhelming. Within months, we were hosting our first event, a weekend retreat for a group of kids from the city who had never set foot in a forest. Watching their faces light up as they explored hiking trails, built campfires, and learned about local wildlife was more fulfilling than I ever could have imagined. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living. Meanwhile, Hannah's life was unraveling. The fallout from the lawsuit had left her reputation in tatters. Word of her involvement in the forgery and financial misconduct had spread through our social circle, and her so-called business collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had been forced to sell her luxury car and move out of her high-rise apartment. One evening, Lisa, one of my mother's old friends, called to update me on the latest gossip. "Did you hear about Hannah?" she asked, her tone dripping with schadenfreude. "No," I said, feigning disinterest. "She's staying with your mother now," Lisa continued. "Apparently, she's completely broke. I almost feel bad for her. Almost." I tried not to dwell on Hannah's downfall. As much as I wanted to feel vindicated, it didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. Her choices had led her here, and while I wasn't responsible for her ruin, I also didn't take pleasure in it. Instead, I focused on growing roots and wings. Every time we hosted a new event or secured a donation, I felt closer to my father. This was the legacy he had envisioned, a life of purpose and giving back. Have you ever taken something painful in your life and turned it into a force for good? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you overcame challenges and found meaning in the aftermath. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a board meeting, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was my mother. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail and pretend she didn't exist. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering sense of obligation, got the better of me. "Hello," I said, my voice cool and guarded. There was a pause on the other end before she spoke. "Rachel, it's me." Her tone was softer than I'd heard in years, almost hesitant. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my walls firmly in place. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "For everything." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Was this genuine remorse, or was she trying to manipulate me again? "You're sorry," I repeated, skepticism lacing my voice. "Yes," she said quickly. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I hurt you. I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now that I was wrong." Her words sounded rehearsed, but there was a crack in her voice that made me pause. "Why now?" I asked. "Why apologize now, after everything?" She hesitated. "Because I miss you, and because I want to fix things if that's even possible." I let out a slow breath, my emotions swirling in a confusing mix of anger, sadness, and the faintest glimmer of hope. "I don't know if we can fix things," I said honestly. "Too much has happened." "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. After we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the phone. Could I forgive her? Did I even want to? As I prepared for the board meeting, my mother's apology lingered in my mind. Was reconciliation possible? Or was this another one of her manipulations? I didn't know the answer, but I was determined to figure it out on my terms. The days following my mother's unexpected apology were a blur of emotions. For years, I had dreamed of hearing those words, "I'm sorry." But now that they'd finally come, they felt hollow. It wasn't just the apology itself. It was the timing, the years of damage that couldn't be undone with a single phone call. I found myself replaying her words in my mind, searching for sincerity, for cracks in her voice that hinted at real remorse. But the question that haunted me most was this: did I even want to forgive her? At Roots and Wings, life was moving forward at a breakneck pace. The organization had grown rapidly, and we were gearing up for our biggest event yet, a week-long outdoor retreat for kids and their families, featuring workshops, hikes, and community-building activities. I threw myself into the planning, grateful for the distraction. Meetings filled my calendar, and late nights at the office became routine. But even in the midst of the chaos, my mother's voice lingered in the back of my mind, tugging at me. One evening, after everyone else had left the office, I found myself alone in the conference room, staring at a whiteboard covered in notes and timelines. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioner, and my thoughts finally caught up with me. Was it possible to move on without forgiving her? I wanted to believe that cutting ties completely would bring me peace, that I could lock away the pain and betrayal and never look back. But deep down, I wasn't sure it was that simple. The following weekend, I took a long hike to clear my head. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a place where I felt connected to my father and his unwavering belief in me. As I walked, memories of my childhood surfaced, the good ones before things fell apart. I thought about how my mother used to braid my hair before school, how we'd bake cookies together on rainy afternoons, how she'd cheer me on at my soccer games. Somewhere along the way, those moments had been replaced by cold indifference, by favoritism and betrayal. But the question lingered. Was there anything left of the woman I'd once looked up to? Have you ever struggled to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? How did you decide whether to let them back into your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. When I returned to the office on Monday, Rebecca was waiting for me in my office. "Busy morning?" she asked, gesturing to the pile of files on my desk. "Always," I replied with a small smile. She hesitated for a moment before pulling out a folder. "I know you've been focused on the nonprofit, but I wanted to share this with you." I opened the folder to find the final legal documents from the lawsuit. Everything was resolved. The accounts were restored, the assets secured. "You've officially won," Rebecca said, her tone warm but firm. I nodded, the weight of the words settling over me. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt empty. That evening, I sat in my apartment with the folder in front of me. The victory felt like an ending, but it also felt incomplete. My mother's apology, Hannah's downfall, the fractured family I'd left behind, they were all threads left hanging, unresolved. I picked up my phone and stared at my mother's number in my contacts. My thumb hovered over the call button before I set it down again. The next morning, I arrived at the Roots and Wings headquarters early. The building, a converted warehouse with large windows and a welcoming front patio, had become my second home. As I climbed the steps, I paused, taking in the quiet beauty of the sunrise reflected in the glass doors. This place was more than an office. It was a testament to resilience, to turning pain into purpose. Later that day, during a meeting with the board, I shared a new idea for the nonprofit, a scholarship fund in my father's name. This isn't just about helping kids, I said, my voice steady. It's about honoring my father's legacy and showing that even in the face of betrayal, we can build something good. The board members nodded in agreement, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. As the day wound down, I found myself back on the steps of the building, watching as families arrived to pick up their kids from an after-school program. Their laughter and chatter filled the air, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard to reclaim what was mine. I thought about my mother, about her apology, and the fractured relationship we now shared. Forgiveness still felt out of reach, but so did the idea of cutting her out of my life completely. Maybe the answer wasn't black and white. Maybe healing was a process, a path I was still learning to navigate. Victory came with a price. The weeks following the court's ruling should have been a time of celebration, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. My trust fund was back under my control, my financial independence secured, and my nonprofit thriving. Yet, the cracks left behind by my family's betrayal seemed to grow wider, the silence between us heavier. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into roots and wings with renewed focus. Our latest retreat had been a resounding success, and donations were pouring in faster than I'd ever anticipated. But no matter how much I achieved, there was a gnawing ache in my chest, a part of me that couldn't let go of the relationships I'd lost. One evening, after a long day at the office, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and scrolled through old photos on my phone. There were pictures of family holidays, birthday celebrations, and random moments that now felt like relics of another life. I stopped on a picture of my mother and me from years ago. We were sitting on a bench at the park, laughing about something I couldn't remember. I barely recognized us. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love because staying hurt too much? How did you find peace with that decision? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Despite my silence, my mother and Hannah were far from quiet. It started with whispers, mutual friends telling me that my name had come up in conversations with my mother. The story she spun was always the same. I was ungrateful, vindictive, and hell-bent on tearing the family apart. I just don't know what happened to Rachel, one friend quoted her saying. She used to be such a sweet girl. Now all she cares about is money. Hannah, of course, chimed in on social media, posting vague captions that were clearly aimed at me. Some people will do anything for attention. Is that really? When family turns on you, remember, their reflection says more about them than about you. At first, I ignored it, choosing to focus on my work instead of their pettiness. But as the rumors spread, I began to wonder if staying silent was the right choice. Rebecca called one afternoon, her tone uncharacteristically serious. I've been hearing some things, she said. Your mother and Hannah are trying to smear your reputation. It's mostly gossip for now, but if it escalates, it could affect the nonprofit. Of course they are, I said bitterly. They can't accept that I won. Rebecca paused. Do you want to respond publicly? I can draft a statement if you think it'll help. I hesitated. A part of me wanted to fire back, to defend myself and expose their lies for everyone to see. But another part of me wondered if engaging would just drag me down to their level. No, I finally said. Let them talk. The people who matter know the truth. Rebecca didn't argue, but I could tell she was worried. The following week, an anonymous letter arrived at my office. The envelope was plain, the handwriting neat but unfamiliar. Inside, I found a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Rachel, you think you know the truth about your father's trust fund, but there's more to the story. He made decisions that he never shared with anyone, not even you. Look into the origins of the fund, and you'll find the answers you've been missing. There was no signature, no return address. I sat at my desk, the letter trembling in my hands. My father had always been an open book, or so I'd thought. The idea that he'd kept secrets from me, especially about something as significant as the trust fund, felt impossible. But the more I thought about it, the more questions bubbled to the surface. Why had he set up the trust fund when he did? Why had he insisted on leaving such a large amount specifically for me, even though he'd never shown much interest in wealth? And why had my mother been so quick to change everything after his death? That evening, I called Rebecca and shared the contents of the letter. It's strange, she said, but not entirely out of the question. Do you want me to start digging into the trust's origins? Yes, I said without hesitation. I need to know the truth. As I ended the call, I stared at the letter again, the words echoing in my mind. My victory in court had felt like the end of a long, grueling battle, but now it seemed like a new chapter was beginning, one that could unravel everything I thought I knew about my father and the legacy he left behind. The anonymous letter became an obsession. I read it so many times the words started to blur together, their meaning etched into my mind. Someone out there knew more about my father's trust fund than I did, and I needed to find out what they meant. Rebecca wasted no time digging into the fund's origins. Within a week, she called me with the first piece of information. The trust fund was set up nearly 2 decades ago, she said. That part you already knew. But what's interesting is the timing. What about it? I asked, my heart racing. It coincides with a large settlement your father received from a legal dispute, Rebecca explained. There aren't many details available, but it appears he was involved in a lawsuit with a former business partner. The settlement was substantial, enough to establish the trust fund and more. I frowned, trying to reconcile this new information with the father I remembered. He never talked about a lawsuit. That's not surprising, Rebecca said. It seems he went to great lengths to keep it quiet. My guess is that he didn't want the details to overshadow his reputation. The revelation left me with more questions than answers. Why had my father fought so hard to keep this part of his life in? And why had he used the settlement money to create the trust fund instead of reinvesting it or spending it on the family? I dug through old family records, searching for anything that might shed light on his motivations. After hours of combing through boxes of papers, I found a journal tucked away in the back of a drawer. The worn leather cover and faded pages told me it had been my father's. Flipping through the journal, I found scattered entries about his legal battle. His words were cryptic, often referring to the situation as a necessary fight and something I had to do for Rachel's future. One entry stood out. Today, the settlement was finalized. It's more than I ever expected, but it doesn't feel like a victory. Losing someone I thought was a friend is a bitter pill to swallow. Still, I have to focus on what matters, Rachel. This fund will give her the freedom to chase her dreams, no matter what happens to the rest of us. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the chest. My father hadn't just been thinking about my financial future. He'd been trying to protect me from something. Armed with this new understanding, I realized I needed to confront my mother. Whatever her role in all of this, I couldn't move forward without addressing the wounds of our fractured relationship. When I called her, she sounded surprised but agreed to meet. We sat across from each other in the living room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. What do you want to talk about? She asked, her tone cautious. I found Dad's journal, I said, watching her reaction carefully. Her eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or regret. And I want to know why you changed the trust fund after he died, I said, my voice steady. I want to know what you were trying to accomplish. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Rachel, you have to understand, your father's decisions weren't always easy to accept. He cared about you, but sometimes it felt like he cared more about planning for the future than living in the present. That's not an excuse, I said. He made those choices because he believed in me. And you try to take that away. Her composure cracked, and for the first time, she looked genuinely vulnerable. I was angry, okay? After he died, I felt like everything was falling apart. And Hannah, she needed help. I thought I was doing the right thing. You weren't, I said firmly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I know I hurt you, Rachel, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I didn't know how to handle losing him. Her words stirred something in me, sympathy, maybe, or just exhaustion from carrying so much anger for so long. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly, but I'm tired of letting this define my life. She nodded, her shoulders sagging. I understand. The conversation didn't heal the wounds between us, but it was a start, a fragile, imperfect beginning. A few days later, I visited my father's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the rows of headstones. I knelt beside his grave, holding the journal in one hand and the anonymous letter in the other. I understand now, I said softly. You were trying to protect me. You believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I placed the journal on the ground, a symbolic gesture of leaving the past where it belonged. As I stood, a sense of peace washed over me. My father's choices, my family's betrayal, the battles I'd fought, they had shaped me, but they didn't define me. It was time to move forward,